Hey guys, this is Emily Moyer, and that is
Michael Wan.
And we just wanted to let all of you who have been following along with our Project Kids series know that we have started a new sub-project called Playing the Glass Bead Game. And this will be a supporters-only series. If you are members of the Project Kids level on my Patreon, you will have access to this as well as all of the other Project Kid stuff, which is the online cafe, the meetups, and whatnot. Or you can buy these individually, these episodes individually. So today we recorded the Playing the Glass Bead Game #1. Michael, why don't you tell people a little bit about what we talked about?
Like literally, we just finished recording it, and I've already forgotten everything we talked about because we've talked about so many interesting things. But we started by going into the history of the Glass Bead Game, what it was, and then we just started playing it, and we put it into context, the historical context of what we're doing is what has always been done, and we have an understanding of this time and place of why it's so significant.
Yes, so what this series will largely be is sort of a demonstration of Michael and I playing the Glass Bead Game both individually and together, and then hoping that that sort of expands out and we, other people start playing in their own unique way and add to the interesting stories that can be told with it. Some of the topics we did cover were time, athletics, GameStop, cryptocurrency, encoding through 3 and 4 letter terms and things like that. So we went all over the place.
In-N-Out Burger.
In-N-Out Burger, right? It has sexual connotations, apparently. We got into all sorts of stuff. It was a really interesting chat. So if you would like to receive these chats, you can go to patreon.com/offplanetmedia and join at the Project Kids level. Or you can send me an email at emilycmoyer@protonmail.com and you can purchase the episode individually for what? What do you think? $3? $2? What do you think? Individual episode?
$2 in this economy?
$3? All right, $3. So $3. And also, I know that some people from Michael's channel, it was interesting when you posted the message there last time, I did get a lot of messages from people saying that they didn't know about this at all and they're glad they found it. So for those of you who are late to the Project Kids series here, I will put together a playlist that maybe you can just post a link to so people can go back and catch up on all the material we've put out up till now. And there will continue to be one Project Kids episode a month and everything else will be Playing the Glass Bead Game. Anything else you want to before we go, Michael?
I think that's good.
All right, cool. Thanks, guys. Bye. Hey, guys, this is Emily, and you just watched the original promotional clip that Michael and I recorded just under a year ago when we recorded the first episode of Playing the Glass Bead Game. And I kind of wanted to give you guys an update of where we're at right now. So if you are interested in observing or playing with us, you know what's going on and what all the options are. So we recorded that episode originally posted on my YouTube channel, February 4th of 2021. So almost a full year ago. And when we started doing the Glass Bead Game, we shifted from doing Project Kids episodes every other week to doing a Glass Bead Game episode 3 weeks of the month and a Project Kids episode the 4th week. Every once in a while, there's 5 weeks in a month for as far as recording days. So some months there's 4 Glass Bead Games. Anywho, so the Playing the Glass Bead Game is a private patron-only series or supporter-only series that has generally a little bit of an intro clip now that plays on YouTube, and then the entire episode is available for supporters. When we first started, we weren't really doing the intro clips. We were just kind of giving a little summary afterwards and making a recording. And for linear archiving purposes, I included that clip, which you just saw. And I wanted to give people now an update on where things are standing. And then what we're going to do is, as a gift to Michael's audience, I'm going to post right after this clip you're listening to right now, the entire episode of the first episode of Playing the Glass Bead Game. So this is where all of this started. We've been doing this Project Kids and Glass Bead Game combined kind of project for almost 2 years now. And we have a growing group of people who are involved in some way or another. And we would love for you guys to join us as well if you feel inspired by this sort of content, or it resonates for you or whatnot. Anywho, so there's a variety of ways to do this for people. The ways to do this are detailed in the description box below. And now enjoy the show. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. And I'm Emily Moyer. Michael Wan is with me. And today is a cool day because we are starting a sub-project, right? I think MKL had like more than 200 sub-projects. And Project Kids is getting a new sub-project today. And that is what we're calling playing the Glass Bead Game. Michael and I have come across this book by Hermann Hesse and been very inspired by it. So this is going to be kind of our new sub-project. And I'm excited to start this today with you, Michael. Welcome back. It's been a little bit.
It's been a little bit. Thank you for having me. Before we get into the sub-project, to put it into context, so what day is today? What day are we filming this on?
Groundhog's Day.
Groundhog's Day. So, which is also, do you know what Groundhog's Day is?
February 2nd.
It's Imbolc.
It's what?
Imbolc. Imbolc. B-O-L-C.
Okay.
It's got a whole bunch of other names too. It's the midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. February 2nd is, okay? Groundhog is a symbol of like the mother going underground, like all this sort of stuff. So it's a really significant thing. So the Groundhog's Day, the National Groundhog's Day ceremony, do you have any idea of all the places in the entire world where it's celebrated? Where is of Groundhog's Day is celebrated? Where is the symbol of the National Groundhog's Day celebration? And I'll give you a hint. Bill Murray made a movie about it.
Puxatawny, Philadelphia.
Puxatawny, Pennsylvania. And you know where Puxatawny, Pennsylvania is?
What's that?
It's at the source location of the western branch of the Susquehanna River.
Yes. All roads always lead back to the
All roads
River.
do. So Imbolc is a very, very significant time throughout all of humanity. And the fact that we're going to be kicking off sub-project 2.2, because that's what February 2nd is. Yeah. And what happened yesterday, unfortunately, you know, whether this is factual or not, Dustin Diamond, DD44, died yesterday. He passed away on his 44th birthday, almost as we're getting close to the Kobe Bryant return. Mm-hmm. So I'm just putting it all into context for as we're going into the Glass Bead game and to see that the game which we're playing is an ancient game.
Yes. And
we are just aware of its current and contemporary expression. So with that said, I've got nothing else to say for the introduction, at least.
All right. So what I'm going to do here, and this is, I would not normally do this, but I think this is so good at explaining what the Glass Bead Game really is. And I'll have some things to say about it afterwards and why I really resonate with this. And I'm sure Michael will as well. But I'm just going to start by reading. It's about a 3-page segment from the introduction to the book. And so I'm going to start with that. All right, so.
Will you tell me what page so I can follow along?
Towards the bottom of page 30. We have the same edition of the book, so Michael's going to follow along with me. Okay, so here we go. And just so if people want to get the book, this is the edition that we both have. So that there's other editions as well that I'm sure have a lot of the same content, but I don't know that they all have the introduction and the other essays written in combination with this. So anywho, okay, here we go. We shall now give a brief summary of the beginnings of the Glass Bead Game. It appears to have arisen simultaneously in Germany and in England. In both countries, moreover, it was originally a kind of exercise employed by those small groups of musicologists and musicians who worked and studied in the new seminaries of musical theory. If we compare the original state of the game with its subsequent developments in its present form, it is much like comparing a musical score of the period before 1500 with its primitive notes and absence of bar lines with an 18th century score, let alone with one from the 19th, with its confusing excess of symbols for dynamics, tempi, phrasing, and so on, which often made the printing of such scores a complex technical problem. The game was at first nothing more than a witty method for developing memory and ingenuity among students and musicians. And as we have said, it was played both in England and Germany before it was, quote unquote, invented here in the Musical Academy of Cologne, and was given the name it bears to this day. After so many generations, although it has long ceased to have anything to do with glass beads. The inventor, Bastien Perrat of Caul, a rather eccentric but clever, sociable, and humane musicologist, used glass beads instead of letters, numerals, notes, or other graphic symbols. Perot, who incidentally has also bequeathed to us a treatise on the apogee and decline of counterpoint, found that the pupils at the Cologne Seminary had a rather elaborate game they used to play. One would call out, in the standardized abbreviations of their science, motifs or initial bars of classical compositions, whereupon the other had to respond with the continuation of the piece, or better still, with a higher or lower voice, a contrasting theme, and so forth. It was an exercise in memory and improvisation, quite similar to the sort of thing probably in vogue among ardent pupils of counterpoint in the days of Schutz, I think it's Schutz or Schutz, Pachelbel, and Bach, although it would have then not been done in theoretical formulas, but in practice on the cembalo, lute, or flute, or with the voice. Bastien Perot, in all probability, was a member of the Journeyers to the East. He was partial to handicrafts and had himself built several pianos and clavichords in the ancient style. Legend has it that he was adept at playing the violin in the old way, forgotten since 1800, with a high arched bow and hand-regulated tension of the bow hairs. Given these interests, it was perhaps only natural that he should have constructed a frame modeled on a child's abacus, a frame with several dozen wires on which could be strung glass beads of various sizes, shapes, and colors. The wires corresponded to the lines of the musical staff, the beads to the time values of the notes, and so on. In this way, he could represent with beads musical quotations or invented themes, could alter, transpose, and develop them, change them, and set them in counterpoint to one another. In technical terms, this was a mere plaything, but the pupils liked it. It was imitated and became fashionable in England too. For a time, the game of musical exercises was played in this charmingly primitive manner. And as is so often the case, an enduring and significant institution received its name from a passing and incidental circumstance. For what later evolved out of that student's sport and Perot's bead-strung wires bears to this day the name by which it became popularly known, the Glass Bead Game. A bare 2 or 3 decades later, the game seems to have lost some of its popularity among students of music, but instead was taken over by mathematicians. For a long while, indeed, a characteristic feature in the game's history was that it was constantly preferred, used, and further elaborated by whatever branch of learning happened to be experiencing a period of high development or a renaissance. The mathematicians brought the game to a high degree of flexibility and capacity for sublimation, so that it began to acquire something approaching a consciousness of itself and its possibilities. This process paralleled the general evolution of cultural consciousness, which had survived the Great Crisis and had, as Plinius Ziegenhalth put it, with modest pride, accepted the fate of belonging to a culture past its prime, as was the case with the culture of late antiquity, Hellenistic culture in the Alexandrian age. So much for Ziegenhalth. We shall now attempt to sketch the further steps in the history of the Glass Bead Game. Having passed from the musical to the mathematical seminaries, a change which took place in France and England somewhat sooner than in Germany, the game was so far developed that it was capable of expressing mathematical processes by special symbols and abbreviations. The players mutually elaborating these processes through these abstract formulas at one another, displaying the sequences and possibilities of their science. This mathematical and astronomical game of formulas required great attentiveness, keenness, and concentration. Among mathematicians, even in those days, the reputation of being a good glass bead player meant a great deal. It was equivalent to being a very good mathematician. At various times, the game was taken up and imitated by nearly all the scientific and scholarly disciplines, that is, adapted to the special fields. There is documented evidence for its application to the fields of classical philosophy and logic. The analytical study of music values had led to the reduction of musical events to physical and mathematical formulas. Soon afterward, philology borrowed this method and began to measure linguistic configurations as physics measures process in nature. The visual arts soon followed suit, architecture having already led the way in establishing the links between visual art and mathematics. Thereafter, more and more new relations, analogies, and correspondences were discovered among the abstract formulas obtained in this way. Each discipline which seized upon the game created its own language of formulas, abbreviations, and possible combinations. Everywhere the elite intellectual youth developed a passion for these games with their dialogues and progressions of formulas. The game was not mere practice and mere recreation. It became a form of concentrated self-awareness for intellectuals. Mathematicians in particular played it with a virtuosity and formal strictness at once athletic and aesthetic. It afforded them a pleasure which somewhat compensated for their renunciation of worldly pleasures and ambitions. for by then such renunciation had already become a regular thing for intellectuals. The glass bead game contributed largely to the complete defeat of, I don't know how to say this word, but it appears a lot in the book, Fulatonism, and to what newly awakened delight in strict mental exercises to which we owe the origin of a new monastically austere intellectual discipline. So I think that when I read that, like I had a feeling when you first brought to my attention the glass bead game, that the comparison of you to Bastian Call is a good one, and that I became very aware that what you and I certainly are engaged in together here, but also what you and I have been pursuing individually without knowing sort of its origins or its name for a very long time has been this sort of this reinterpretation of things that people generally think of as intellectual subjects or topics or whatever, and like running them through a creative filter and throwing them back out to the world and seeing what comes back to you and then reimagining that and whatnot. And that it's something that either we were taught and trained to do or that we were naturals at. And so it was sort of encouraged outside of our awareness that we do this. And I don't know, like I really like this. It makes sense of a lot of my experiences. And so I'm looking forward to sort of hearing your sort of thoughts on this. And if you had the same sort of takeaway when you read this.
So definitely. So first off, this is where it all began from this letter, which I got, and, you know, it's from the Bastian Pero of Call, who you made reference to in the book. And it was addressed from the, Salt Lake City Masonic Temple. So that's where it all began. A couple things, like what jumped out to me from that introduction, and I'm on page maybe 112. Like it's really dense reading. Like I mean, you don't breeze through it. I'm on 112, and they just keep on talking about the glass bead game, but they still haven't like played it, you know? Yeah. So there's a lot of like the way the author is like kind of dancing around it, and like, you know, keeps on saying like everything's about the glass bead game, but never really explaining it. And I'm thinking about it particularly, you know, you and I are coming into this with like, oh, I think we're playing the glass bead game, and this is what it's talking about. So we've got like this very, very we've got this very like personal and almost like a practical reason on why we want to read this. Like I was like, I want to hear what this guy was saying about this thing, which we're doing, which came about in this very, very natural way, like grassroots kind of way. And I'm thinking about like the reader who reads this book. Like a lot of people read this book. It's, you know, considered like a piece of classic literature. So people read it in high school or what have you. And, you know, they're like, what the hell is this even about? Like, you know, but if you're coming from like, that's what I'm finding so interesting. Like, I can imagine reading this as a high school student saying, when is this going to be friggin' over? And now I'm reading this as like someone who's like, when are they going to tell me more? You know, how like that in itself is part of it. So what jumps out to me, particularly in what you just said, was, the glass bead game is one is it is going to meet it meets the culture and the time and probably the players at whatever happens to be in vogue at that time and place. And you know, right now looking at and let me take a step back. So the word which you were talking about, which you're not familiar with, Fullerian, I don't know. Yeah. It's talking about like a time of a very watered down culture, like People magazine culture, like where we are right now. And this book was written, I think it was originally written in the 30s, but not published until the 40s. You know, it was written from a very kind of like a culturally high perspective, and intellectuals like, you know, perch. But we are living right now, without a doubt, you know, in the culture of like what he's kind of making fun of, or like saying like, you know, this is like there's no glass bead in this culture, this Fullerian culture. And the glass bead, in fact, brought people out of that culture. And I'm going to suggest that what we're doing is we're doing the glass bead game with the culture. Like he was like mathematicians are doing it. Like, you know, all of these like very, very sophisticated practitioners. And we're demonstrating this with the most base material, with Hollywood films, with Netflix, with like, you know, it's like the glass bead game, which ultimately to me is the artistic representation of patterns in life, and then gaining meaning with it, and then also being able to then have a dialogue with it. And so like I think that we're experiencing it. Like I'm fascinated to read more about it because it's giving a context, but I also think it's a little bit limiting in the fact that it's saying like, no, it can't happen at this level. And we're like, yeah, like, you know, like a class, like someone who looks at the poetry of like, you know, the Shakespearean sonnets, and looking at like modern spoken word, and like maybe looking down their nose at it and saying like that there's no art in it, and they're missing the art that's in it. And I would say like that is the current version, or at least the way which we're playing this glass bead game, which has been around for a long time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that also in the intro, when describing that philoctenism, whatever the age that sort of that was or whatnot, sounded exactly like what we're living through here, where like, you know, lots of attention paid to celebrities or
Right.
whatnot, and it was like kind of nonsense and whatever, and you know, right. And so this was sort of, so here's the definition of feuilleton, the part of a European newspaper devoted to light fiction reviews and articles of general entertainment. Yeah. So that is basically what our entire culture is made up of.
Right. That's where we are. That's People magazine.
Yeah. And then the feuilletonism is the practice among European newspapers of allowing space, usually at the bottom of a page or pages, for fiction, criticism, columnists, etc. The practice of writing critical or familiar essays for the Teutonian pages. So anyway, yes, so that's where we're at. And I think, you know, one of the, like, I think that part of the reason people would have thought, okay, like what you and I are playing the glass bead game with, the material that we're sort of using as the objects that we are stringing or throwing around or, you know, interpreting or whatnot, even though they would largely be considered in some ways cheap pop culture, I think that like we are in this age where things are encoded digitally, right? Mm-hmm. And so even though they may be sort of garbage, compressed within them somewhere is a code or a link that if you can unzip it, opens something else up.
Without a doubt.
It's like the secret door kind of thing. And I think that's where the best thinkers and the most interesting creativity and whatnot is being hidden. And it's just the modern sort of iteration of that. And so, yes, I agree with you. And what I like about this time, which there's lots of things we don't necessarily love about this time, but there are so many things with which you can play the glass bead game. Right? There's an endless array of, you know, shows, movies, books, videos on YouTube, weird little sayings, the 3-letter codes that are traded on the stock market, devices you can wear on yourself, all that have like one outer meaning and then very, very many layers of inner meaning, like of interior meaning on the inside if you look past that. And so like, theoretically, we should definitely not be bored during this time.
Exactly. Like the notion, or at least the way I take it with the glass bead game, is like every single thing that you could put your consciousness to is going to be able to do that. Whether it's like 3 standard deviations away of like, you know, just like absolutely AI created culture, or if you're just looking at the clouds, you know, it's if you understand and I'm saying this with the lowercase gbg, like the nature, and this is what I think is so significant, is like the very act of playing this game of like is a consciousness. It's a wiring of the consciousness so you can get out of the prison of whatever is you think life is, whether that be, as we see within within the story of the Glass Bead Game, is like, the intellectual pursuits within Germany, or whether it's like, you're completely fixated by the comings and goings of the Kardashians. It's like, once you understand, like, that's the nature of our consciousness. I mean, that's why they always say, like, the human mind is meant to go and identify patterns. It's like, that's another way of saying the human mind is designed to go and play the Glass Bead Game. And then, but not just to notice the patterns, but then to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And the more beautiful the patterns, and the more you can spin it, and then the more you can then become engrossed within that as a dialogue. That's when, to me, that's where like the actual, it goes from being an intellectual pursuit to an actual experience of life.
Absolutely. So some of what this made me think of, like, pretty early on in me talking on media, I talked about these sort of dreams, or like, I don't know if I was really dreaming, but in that stage where you're not really completely awake, but not really completely asleep, right? I would have these visions of, like, I was playing some sort of, it was like an obstacle course or some kind of life-size board game, like Sudoku or crossword puzzle or whatever, but that multiple things were involved in this, right? Like answer intellectual pursuits, like answering questions or solving math problems, but also dance moves and physical feats and awareness of pop culture and whatnot. It was like this multi-dimensional game that had all of these different aspects, like, to it, right? And one of the things that I would see is sometimes I'd be on the game board by myself, but other times I would end up in a duel or a battle with somebody else. And what we were doing is exactly like a modern version of what's described it. Like, I'd throw out a thought or an idea or a geometry, and they'd take it and spin it around and throw something back. What can you do with that? Right? Like, try to top this. And it made me think sometimes of, did you ever see that episode of The Cosby Show where, like, Bill Cosby and his friend are, like, having the tap dance battle? And each one would do, like, a fancier move and, like, challenge, right? Like that kind of thing. And this would go on in my mindful space and dream for hours, forever. And right. And although it was sort of, there was an element to it that was exhausting and tedious, it was so exciting to see what the other person was going to come up with and send back. And, I think there's some modern iterations of, it makes things that I would compare it to are dancing battles, right? When you're looking at a really good popper, you generally are looking at somebody who has a really good knowledge of history, comedy, music, like certain sort of pop culture elements, that they're able to bring that into their physical body language. And if nothing else, be thinking about something specific while they're doing their movement and their moves. And that then becomes infused into the movement, and it becomes not just a battle of movement, but also of ideas and consciousness and all of that kind of stuff. Also, certain kinds of tennis players, people who do capoeira, right? Or certain kinds of martial arts that are a little bit more of the creative rather than just the physical nature. And I'm sure there's endless more of these, but I also think about you sort of riding your bicycle down the dirt paths near the river, and you're thinking about something in your head, and you're moving your body physically, and you're observing what's going on in the nature around you and what the people are doing. And it's very similar to what I do when I'm dancing at a party, and I'm dealing with the sounds coming at me, the geometry of the room, the strange people are going on, the thoughts in my own head, how I'm moving my body, and picking certain objects to sort of give my attention to while I'm doing this. Right. And I love that we finally have a name for that art and that skill.
Right. Right.
It's the thing.
So I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
Are there videos I can watch of you dancing at parties?
No. This is like what's
why not?
Well, I think because I had my big time in the circle before everybody had a camera on their phone. kind of thing, right? But also, as time went on, I became more and more like, I moved from the center of the room to the corner because I was really just more interested in dancing by myself and getting lost in my own world than being a spectacle. And then the other thing that's weird, and this is just like an observation that I've made, for the thousands of parties that I've been to, there exist very few pictures of me from parties. And it's weird. Sometimes I'll see a picture from a party and the picture will be of an area of the room where I know I was standing next to the person who's in the picture for most of the night, but there's no pictures of me next to the person. So I don't know if when I really get into my groove, I'm moving at a pace that the camera doesn't capture, because I can think of like maybe 5 or 10 pictures I've ever, I mean, sometimes I'll know someone who's took a picture, like a friend or whatever, right? And then I'm consciously attached to that. But there's other times when I see the guy who's the photographer at the party, right, take a picture of me, but that never ends up on the hundreds and hundreds of pictures that are there. But I'll see the scenery that I was sort of standing around in. So I don't know what's going on with that. But it was something I did become aware of at a certain point, that for how many parties I've been to, there exist very few pictures of me at parties.
Well, I mean, this is probably a little bit more about me. Like, I just really like to watch people dance. I've always been that way. There's something like it's, and for probably multiple reasons, but I like to see how people move their body, like and particularly as it relates to, like, there's something like gymnastics. Like, I like gymnastics, but like there's something about, like, the floor exercise, the closest thing to it, because there's something about the movement of the body to music, which has always been appealing to me. So that's just in general. I've always been that guy. But in light of what you just shared, particularly as you're talking about, like, you know, understanding the geometries of the room and the people around, like, I would love to go and see that. So this is my request. In the event in the near future, you find yourself in an opportunity where you're dancing and it's appropriate, have Laura film it, or have someone else capture it and put it on for the patrons, or just give it to me. And I just like to see it. And I'd like to see it in context of everything we just saw. Is that too much of a request, of an Imbolc request for a man like me to ask?
No, try and catch it when I'm not aware that you're doing it, because once you become aware, it's difficult. But the other thing is, like, sometimes if you pop in, like, to the music part of Conspiracy Cocktail, or actually we're going to start doing just a dancing kind of thing called Dance to Know. If you pop in, sometimes you can see me dancing around.
All right. You got me. Okay, now I'll go. Okay.
So tell me, just out of curiosity, because we haven't ever really talked about this, what kind of music do you like?
It depends upon the mood. So current, like, my relationship with Jenny's got an amazing sense of musical, like, she's got an ear. She, like, you know, she went to like music college, and she has a real interest in discovering new music. And so to me, that's my absolute favorite. Like, I kind of like, I do really well in terms of appreciating what's around me, as opposed to, like, being more active in terms of filling my head with what I choose to want to listen to. But I have a very, very, very deep like, you know, I listen to a lot of different music. And I want to pull this up, which I pulled this up. Do I have screen share?
Oh, let me do that to you. There we go.
All right. So I want to bring this up now before I forget it, because when you started reading that portion from the Glass Bead Game, I didn't know what portion you're going to read. And then there was the term, the musicians and musicologists, like, you know, the scientific studiers of music, I suppose. So let's go to this for a moment. Where do we got this? Right here. So somehow this plays a part into it, or at least this is what I'm interested in. So the A44 standard pitch, do you know what that is?
No, it's the 440 hertz. Okay.
So all musical scales are tuned to that. Like that's like middle C, I think. Like I know very little about musical theory. So if I'm slightly off in my explanation, that's why. But it's like I'm generally right. So A44, and that's like a specific thing. That's like a certain frequency, like 440 vibrations per second. All right. And so that's even more interesting because, like, if you remember, before we got into this, I did my little dust and diamond comment in 44 and DD and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So what happened was this A44 as standard pitch was adopted. It was adopted in 1885, I think. Where does it say this? It says, before standardization of 440, many countries and organizations followed the French standard since the 1860s of 435 hertz. I don't have the ear. Like I've heard the difference between 440 and 435. I'm like, I don't know. I don't get it. Like I appreciate that it exists. I can understand it conceptually and abstractly better than I can like actually hear it. But nonetheless, it happened in 1885 that under the recommendation of the Austrian government. So now we're coming back. Like if you go back, the Glass Bead Game takes place in the 25th century, but it makes a lot of reference to the composers of Germany and Austria of this time period. And during this time period, they made this shift. Now, a lot of people who get that I've, again, I'm getting a little bit outside of my area of expertise, but I've certainly studied it as it relates to frequency and consciousness, that the movement to 440 standard pitch has like changed the frequency of the consciousness of the planet. How it used to be at 435 is different. I think there's some other
432. I think 430, the shift from 432.
Yeah, it's the 432 is what you always hear about. But nonetheless, I wanted to point out like how that this, so they're like, that is seemingly playing into it. And also I would imagine like, let's go even say this, like, what has been suggested, particularly as it relates to a conspiratorial, like world domination sort of perspective, is that the change to 440 has been part of the controlling of the consciousness of the globe in order to debase everything, so that like, the pop culture auto tune, which we think of like right now for music, is part of the debasing of consciousness. And they go into this a little bit later in the introduction when they talk about in ancient China how it was understood the quality of the music of a culture determines the quality of the aspirations of the culture. So nonetheless, so like we see that shift going to 440 from 432. It's coming out of the same place where all of this is coming from. But then in light of what we were just saying is like they can still shift, like, the experience of moving our culture into something which is very, very debased. We can still, the Glass Bead Game is, if anything, even richer now than it has ever been, because it's not left to just the intellectuals, the mathematicians and the musicologists and the architects, but like, we can do it in this debased language, which was kind of thrusted upon us 160 years ago. And then there's one more place I want to go with that, and then I'll let you reflect. So it says the Austrian government. So I just rewatched the movie The Illusionist last week. Do you know what The Illusionist is?
Yeah, Jeff and I just talked about it in our little bit on Rufus Sewell.
Correct. When's the last time you saw it?
No, I've only seen it once in maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
All right. So Rufus Sewell plays the crown prince of the Austrian government, probably around 1885. It was before their automobiles, and it's like he is right there. So we've got our our John Smith character is right there. And when you rewatch it, so I rewatched it last week. I saw it years ago, and it's got a lot of my favorite. And we could go into it. It's got Giamatti and Ed Norton. And remember, Giamatti is Skull and Bones. He's literally Skull and Bones. His father was the commissioner of Major League Baseball. He went to Yale, fine arts degree, just the same time as Ed Norton. They're all the same guys. The director and writer of the Illusionist also is a Yaley with fine arts degree. They're all the same folks. But anyway, so I rewatch it, and my memory had really had like the Soul character, like in this really kind of dualistic black and white, like this was bad guy, you know, other guys, good guys. And I'm watching it again. I'm like, he certainly has his character flaws. That was without a certain, but like the more I was watching and I was thinking about it, like this really was the good guy, or at least he had like a vision as for the leadership. You know, there's a certain responsibility, I suppose, you have as the leader of whether it be a nation or of your tribe, and how he was kind of like set up to fall. Maybe even in a way like we've seen like the setups that have been going on in the last couple of weeks with people. But nonetheless, like I find that is also a significant part of how we can connect all of these sort of things.
Absolutely. Okay, so you said a lot of stuff there for me to respond to. So first of all, as for I know that the musical shift, right? From the either 432 or 435, whichever it actually is, because there's probably some controversy about that, to the 440, is also tied into the same period of time where we got the Frankfurt School, where we got Tavistock Institute, right? And of course, when I went and put in MK Ultra plus Glass Bead Game, what I got back was Tavistock, right? To a certain extent, right? So that was part of the machinations, part of how they did what they did. So that time period is kind of like the same thing. As to the music stuff, I appreciated what you said about sort of being more of like an appreciator of what is going on around you, as opposed to pursuing a certain sound, you know, yourself. For me, like, at least at this point, like I very rarely listen to the same music twice anymore, because most of my music consumption is in electronic DJ sets or live PA kind of performances. And so I'm not constantly re-listening to the same thing. And one of the things that I think I instinctively, intuitively liked about dance music, like in the beginning, because in the beginning I didn't really know what I was doing. I just liked it and felt good and it's fun. But as time has gone on and I've done a lot of Glass Bead Game playing to the music, I think what I like about it is the DJ is in control to a certain extent over the pitch that we hear the music in, right? And so not every DJ is going to play the track the same way, at the same speed, the same pitch, what they mix it with, you know, so it isn't this thing like, okay, if you're hearing it on the radio, you're pretty much hearing everything in the same thing done by auto-tune or whatever, right? Like the DJ has a level of control over how they're interpreting the sounds and how you hear it. And I guess for me, what I find the most interesting, and this can be done whether you're hearing music at like a pitch that's like harmonious for humans to listen to and understand or not, is like it's layered sound. Electronic music, especially the kind of techno that I really like, it's like frequency on top of frequency on top of frequency, and then the way they interplay with each other and whatnot. And so even if I gave 3 different DJs the same 10 records or same 10 tracks to play, the way they put it together is going to be completely different. And so the information exchange between the frequency is kind of different, and it makes me think of the various beads on the strings, right, and how they reflect off of each other, and the design of the interior of the bead. I mean, it's just, there's no you can never exactly reproduce the same piece of music in the way that I listen to that. And so I'm constantly exposing myself to at least new combinations of information, even if the letters that make up the words of the information are the same. And I love that. Like, I love that headspace. And then when a new sound comes in, it's like, okay, like that's, you know, a new thought or a new idea or someone else's perspective on it, and another sound. And especially when you get a DJ who's really good, or someone who's doing like a combined set where they're both playing other people's tracks and then adding musical effects or things of their own to it, it really starts to develop a personalized filter and whatnot. And I just love that. Like, I love when I get into this back and forth between myself as the dancer and the DJ or the person playing the music, right? And then also just my own ideas of the sounds that are coming to my head. You know, like, the music will happen. It'll make me think something. I'll sort of send that idea back out. The music almost seems to reinterpret it and send something else back to me and whatnot. And I can go on and on and on. with this kind of stuff. And so for me, that's like generally where I go. I do like some, like, not in a long time, I don't listen to popular music, but I like some music with words, but it's usually something that has like a very unique characteristic sound to it, right? That grabs my attention, as opposed to just, oh, I like this person's voice, I like all their songs, I like whatever, right? So I wanted to say that about the music, but one of the things that I noticed while you were talking is music uses letters in the same way that we are now being exposed, that chemistry does to a certain extent. A with a little 2, combination of letters with sometimes a little number up in the corner or down below, and then oftentimes 2 or 3 letters together that we see both in chemical compounds, right? But also in the reduced language we know as like text and emoji kind of speak, like LOL, right? Like LMAO, right? Like when you first started looking at that, it's like, is this a chemical right? And so we're receiving these codes that people used to only receive through the music or the musicology aspect of the glass bead game, through both like our chemical surroundings and the way we are communicating with each other. And I sense that what we've been experiencing this past year, as we've been exposed to all of this talk about like viruses and DNA and all this kind of stuff, is there's a large something happening with us seeing these letters over and over again, or them being spoken or expressed. And then the same thing goes when you pay attention to like the stock market or the cryptocurrency markets. Those things are expressed in the same way as well, and they're expressed with energy behind them. Surging energy, crashing energy, and in the case of DNA, RNA, things like that, fear energy, hope for relief energy, all of this kind of stuff are riding on these sequences of letters. And so when you think about the possibility of numerology and gematria and things like that that are associated with this, what are these letters, these information packets carrying with them? Does that make sense? Like.
So, I mean, like what you just said, like what really jumped out, you said, I was thinking about like the ticker tape, like where you see like the stock listings and the movements going across. And there used to be a point like where that was the only people. I don't know if you ever seen like, movies or which depict like the 1920s and would have like some capitalist baron who would have like a ticker tape on his desk, and he would have like this tape coming out, and then like it became like you would see like the latest whatever trades were going across the stock market, and then like eventually it became watered down for everyday man. And like if you go and you watch like CNN like in the middle of the day, I suppose, like, and that was like when they first started really like over stimulating the mind, or I guess it like came in bit. That was like a big jump. At least I was always aware of that. And I'm thinking about like what you're just saying in terms of like the energy behind these letters. And more than anything else is there's a trajectory, which is then going to be tied into the ticker tape, because it's either going up or down. Like you're either seeing the price going up or down, and like what that does. And you're absolutely right, because when it is on the CNN, if you're not like, actively like, no one's actively really following that anymore. Like, I mean, if you were a day trader, that's not how you're getting your information. You're getting it something else. And so it's like, it's just meant for subliminal back noise. And undoubtedly that has to have an effect amongst all the other things, which we're seeing within consciousness, whether that's just purely like creating a chaotic background, or maybe something a little bit more, building a specific structure.
Okay, so I have a good example of what I'm talking, one to kind of look into here. This is something that Jeff and I fell onto at some point last year that we thought was interesting and meant something, but we weren't quite sure what at the time. And I feel maybe we can start to make some little sense of it now.
All right.
Okay, so we got into someone he follows who does a lot of like the encrypt, like working on the blockchain and stuff like that, was talking about how something that they were doing reflected the same role that ATP plays in the body, in the cellular system, right? And so ATP is energy, right? It's a adenosine 5-triphosphate, or ATP, is the principal molecule for storing and transferring energy in cells. It is often referred to as the energy currency of the cell and can be compared to storing money in the bank, right? And so, of course, for me, as soon as Jeff says this, I go, oh, well, ATP is the name of the men's professional tennis tour. Right?
Yeah, as soon as you said ATP, I thought we're going tennis.
Right? So ATP is the Association of Tennis Professionals, right? And one of the things that is unique about tennis is that the tour moves all over the world all the time. Whereas like the NFL or the NBA, they're usually pretty much within the country and they're focused around like just really a few certain cities, right? Kind of thing. And there's not very much soccer has somewhat of an international flavor to it, but tennis with the exception of the month of December, right, which is the only time of the year that it's off, which is interesting based on other social programs that run in December, right? But with the exception of December, you can find tennis tournaments of obviously amateur levels, but the varying levels at the professional level in cities all over the world all the time. Now, some of the criticism that both people who watch tennis and people who players and people who commentate on tennis have said is that like this is an exhausting schedule. Like this is a really like no other sport has this kind of thing where they're going from country to country every week and they're playing this often. And I mean, like the top professional tennis players play way more frequently than in any other sport, right? So to me, I've talked to you about how I see, tennis as representational of a lot of things going on in our culture. To me, just this, if you look at the definition of the ATP that we talked about in terms of cellular energy, it is, right, the principal molecule for storing and transferring energy in cells. Right. So if we think of like each of the players or maybe the player in their team or even like the contingency from a country or who's playing at a particular tournament as an energy cell that's being moved from place to place. And this kind of matches what we've talked about in terms of with the child trafficking, that it not that there isn't some element of it being around sex and drugs and whatever, but also about having certain people present in certain locations at certain times to create certain kinds of energies or plays between energies or something like that, right? So you have these people, these characters who I think are symbolic of something else being moved around from place to place to place all year long, right? It is often referred to as the energy currency of the cell and can be compared to storing money in the bank. So they're moving around the same way that money is moved around in the markets constantly, right? And they're doing this thing where in their own version, I mean, if you were watching, Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal go after it for 4 or 5 hours, they're fucking playing the glass bead game hardcore with each other, right? On many, many levels. So like, this is just one example. I'm sure we can come up with a million more. And I'm sure that there is something meaningful to all this attention that's been played to GME this past week, AMC, BTC, DOGE, all these things. Like what are the chemical compounds coded for these things as well? What are the vibrations and the geometries given off by their numerical value? People who understand gematria, I've never listened to a rabbi describe what's happening when you say these words, like how the reality is actually formed by the numerical vibration of that word kind of stuff. I think that we're in a system that's like way more complicated than a lot of people understand. And there's people who have become masterful at playing it and disguising it as entertainment or a banking system or whatnot, right?
And maybe not complicated, but sophisticated.
Yeah.
Sophisticated. And like, going back to the idea of the glass bead game, it is an entrance into the interconnectivity of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it's like as what watching the tennis match is no different if you have the right way of understanding it, I suppose, of recognizing the functions which are happening within the physical body. And And again, like I always go to like, well, what do we do with this information? And it's not just like kind of like, and my guess is this is what the book is going to be kind of about, like that it's not just like a mental pursuit as opposed to like a a practice and something which is practical. And my guess is like, you know, as one becomes adept, that they're then able to have more control in their life as it meets the outer world, because there's all like, you know, oh, we just changed the sound frequency to 440, and that doesn't mean anything to you, but all of a sudden it just changed your consciousness a little bit. And it's like there's you know, here maybe it's 165 years later, but it's like, you know, that's we're returning that serve, which is typically aced every single person, but like suddenly we could return it. They don't even know that it can be returned, right? You know. And so that's what it feels like, particularly now. But I personally don't want to approach it in terms of a battle as much as I approach it as terms of like the joy of competition.
Yes.
Like not to destroy your opponent, but something fun happens when you have competition.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. And you know, you and I were talking a little bit yesterday, and I was explaining sort of the various characteristics of some of the players and why I like certain players in certain ways. And to me, like the most enjoyable to watch are the ones who like, they really like playing the game, whether they're winning or losing, that back and forth when they really get into, and they like the surprise that comes at them and trying to come up with something clever to go back at it with and whatnot. Like there develops a rhythm that I think is the what you're talking about, that sort of joy, that passion, that oomph, that sort of the word is escaping me right now, but like this like vitality, this amazing sort of, you know, like energy of something, right? That I super enjoy. But yes, I agree. I think it's fun. I think playing the game is fun, and it's more fun when you have someone to play with than when you destroy someone and the game is over and it's like, okay, what do I do? You know, it's more fun to play. It made me think while you were talking about the sophistication and about how the consciousness change happened with the switch to 440. I wonder what switch in our consciousness happened when texting language became a big thing.
Totally. Or
Right.
what texting like, or what happened in our consciousness when everything was moved from analog to digital, or what, like anytime you see like these from official sources, we are changing the frequency in which you are communicating, you know, that's going to change things. And, you know, there's more obvious and there's more subtle, definitely I think about this in terms of generations all the time, of like, think about like growing up in the texting world where texting is part of the natural wiring of connections in your brain, versus like you grew up before there was texting and like you had to learn the language. And I think there's so many ways, it hints to so many differences within consciousness. And the more we understand that, the more you can also appreciate like how to communicate with people, and like where people have certain different skill sets and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Laura just looked up, and let's see if I can try and BTC, the chemistry. Okay, so this is interesting, right? Because I wonder sometimes, like when people are constantly texting 5 to 10 times a day, LOL or something like that, right? Like we think it means laugh out loud, but if there's a chemical compound that's coded for, does that somehow generate?
Wow, yeah, exactly,
right?
exactly. So, maybe the LOL is even LOL, it's 707. You know, there's all these different sort of, like it can flip around.
Right. So she just looked up one, which was BTC. So Bitcoin is BTC. That's the code, right? And there's a lot of discussion around that. It stands for bistrichloromethyl, or trifosgene, which is a reagent in organic synthesis that's used in cleaning supplies. Right. So it's a reagent, which means it makes something happen. It's an active element. It makes something happen. So think about every time somebody's emotion is attached to their Bitcoin trade, that there's, you know, like when that Bitcoin surges or when it falls, right? You know, like what if it's literally coding this reactive quality sort of into our greater like into, I mean, I don't even know what the word to use is, but I think you get what I'm talking about, right? And it would
completely. Like there's all of this code, and whether one is conscious of it or not, in fact, the more unconscious you are, probably the greater the impact. That these seemingly disconnected connections exist, that the same initials have the same sort of meaning, but they do exist within the collective consciousness. Like within the collective consciousness, there's a whole bunch of people who BCT means, like, as soon as they hear that, they're like, Bitcoin, that means something. And you've got a whole bunch of people, when you hear that, those same initials, it means that catalyst agent or catalyst molecular compound and cleaning agents. But regardless, in the collective consciousness, those are both very strong, and those are connected. Those are immensely connected. And by us being regular folk, just walking around, and whenever that's happened, like, yeah, we are walking within that field of that collective consciousness. So of course, like, all of that stuff's going to be triggered. And it's interesting. I'm thinking about this as you're talking about it, because I can only speak for myself, but when we start getting into chemistry and we start, like, I have a pretty good understanding of how the human body works, but mostly in terms of like concepts. But when we come down to like the actual like molecular structures and organic chemistry and stuff like that, like, I don't know or don't care. And I don't know if Laura is exactly like an organic chemist, but I would imagine she's closer to that field certainly than I am. And so I love, like, that information is coming from, like, her touch of the in that research.
Okay, so here's a couple of things, and so that is the code for Doge. TG is the code.
What? No.
Is that the code for Doge?
No, it's Doge, DOGE. But
Okay.
if you look at the symbol,
Okay.
I sent it to you. So
I get what you're saying now. Okay.
And it's
So-
also involved in chemicals.
So remember last week we experienced this Doge went up like 300%, right? Like, kind of in response to some of the GameStop thing. That's the cryptocurrency with the little Shiba Inu dog. So,
Which you and I talked about 3 weeks ago.
yes.
And I don't really have much interest in cryptocurrency, but I have a very big interest in that type of dog.
Yeah, yes.
And
Right.
so that's why when I saw this, and did I tell you my boys got another dog?
No.
They got another one just last week. It's the cutest thing I've ever seen.
The Shiba
anyway,
Inu,
go on.
also a Shiba Inu?
I'm sorry?
A Shiba Inu? The
They
same-
had an all white one which disappeared, and then they just got one which was half, I don't know how to pronounce it, but you know what I'm talking about, and Labradoodle. And it sounds like a weird combination, but it's like the sweetest thing I've ever seen, and it's
Okay.
beautiful.
All right, so that's interesting, right? The surge of Doge also brought the Shiba Inu situation into your life. Okay, Laura, so Doge
And that happened 2 weeks ago. And so, like, we're 2 weeks ahead, like a week ahead of the curve, but go on.
all right. So Laura, so Doge, the code for Doge is DOGE, right?
Mhm.
But Laura found that there's this chemical company that's code is DGE, and then they have like an interesting kind of O as their symbol, right? So it's another interpretation of DOGE. And what this company is they make smart specialty chemicals. And they market,
that sounds pleasant.
they market and distribute premium specialty chemicals. Right. And so now one of the things that we've been hearing in a variety of ways for a number of years is that people, I don't know, okay, I'm starting to get confused. So is that people who are into cryptocurrencies are having their brains washed, right? They're being lured into like a cyborg and AI takeover, all of this kind of stuff, right? Now, it is kind of interesting that all of these things code for chemical activity. Right. So I did hear something yesterday, like I haven't listened to the piece of content, but something that Randy put out, somebody commented in the comment section about that he was talking, or someone in relation to this was talking about that the virus was actually going to affect people, like the new iteration of whatever this fucking virus we've been dealing with is actually going to affect people through the computer. Right. Now, so I have felt over the course of the past year, but especially some of these things we've been experiencing politically the last few weeks, that it's very tied to some of this sort of crypto activity and stock market activity and whatnot. I mean, what if literally by putting enough energy behind some of these codes on the computer, it can create almost a similar like reaction in the person who's taking in that information as if their brains were exposed to those chemicals.
Yeah.
Smart chemicals.
That's the nature of magic.
Yeah.
Like the nature of magic is sympathy.
This is
like
algorithmic alchemy. Yeah, like algorithmic alchemy.
It's all the same sort of thing. And it's like, it changes. Like, as you were talking about, like with the chemicals, I'm like in technology, they have this thing called like the OSI stack. I don't remember what it stands for. It's been a while, but it talks about the different layers of technology. Like the very bottom layer is like the physical infrastructure, and the very top layer is like an application. And there are all these different layers. And what's important about this is the model. And it says like the whole thing, their entire like internet technology experience, like we can look at different layers of the stack is what they would say. And then you have like influences everything else. Well, apply that to life in general. And so like the stack of experience and chemicals, the chemical organic chemistry is one of the stack layers. And like there are all of these infinite ways of like influencing. Like, I get into like the river magic, and that's just one stack. That's one layer in the stack. The chemistry, all of these different things, but they're all about trying to like influence and control. And then to make it even more real, like what's got to happen is like when to have it go against someone's will, they're going to have someone willfully accept something in their body.
Mm-hmm.
And then like, so when you were talking about the, what was it? Was it the BCT, the thing, which was the catalyst? You were saying like, this is something that creates an action. That's what mRNA, vaccines are. They're not vaccines. They're catalysts for the body to produce a protein. Regardless of producing a protein, it makes something happen. Like it's meant to do that. So that's what it sounds like to me. And like you go and you include in so many other layers, like hypnotism and magnetism and electromagnetic fields and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, yeah.
I mean, think of how many times in the last 6 to 9 months the term mRNA has been said, that when we rarely heard it before. And there's certain people who certainly have never said it before, but now they say it constantly.
Yeah.
Right? And the energy that's sort of behind that, right? And so like maybe at this point, the actual jab is just ceremonial or symbolic, and that the inoculation is happening through this alphanumerical coding into people's consciousness, and entirely possible that people will start generating these proteins, whether they actually get the shot or not, based on this.
They've already told you that's how it works. They've given it a different context, but that is the nature of herd immunity. Oh, you don't need to get anything because it's happened on a different level of reality, and then it's going to affect you on the physical level. That's herd immunity. What you're describing is the same thing, like a little slightly tweaked, but it's like, yeah, we just need to introduce it, and enough people buy into it and accept it as reality. Well, then it's going to, at least for the unconscious.
Yeah.
And again, there's a big question. We don't understand friggin' life, but like we do know it's changing right now. I think us and all the other Glass Bead players are like, all right, like in the same way. So imagine this, like the story which we're being told right now is like the small time investors finally getting in on the game.
Right.
Right. Like finally, and like you realize like that ain't true at all.
No.
It's like Robin Hood shut down in a second. Right. Like the Treasury, the Secretary of the Treasury Department is on the payroll of the company that owns Robinhood. Like
right.
That's the nature of the structure of the matrix. Like the matrix works like that. Matrix ain't reality, not even close. Your consciousness could be tied to it. But nonetheless, that's the same thing with becoming aware of the glass bead game or synchromysticism or whatever word you want to go and call it. And going from like how they were saying, like, remember in what you read, it began as just this fun childhood sort of game, and then it became something else. Yep. And so what I think we're recognizing, what started out, particularly in its current form, which has to do with like popular culture, but this idea of gaining insight and knowledge into reality by looking at the most base stuff which is given to us, like that's the latest version of the glass bead game, and we're all becoming aware players.
Yeah.
And that's very, very different than just like, being under the hypnosis of like watching the news and all that sort of stuff of what you're describing, of where the shot only becomes ceremonial.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also of like the sort of mythic demoralization of the idea that like even Robin Hood is corrupt now. He doesn't take from the rich and give to the poor anymore, right? Like kind of thing. Because in our mythology, that was Robin Hood's character, right? Was that he took from the rich and gave to the poor. Now we can have conversations about whether that was moral or not, right? But that was the character he always was in history. And in this case, right, the game is stopped. The game is stopped, and Robin Hood now steals from the poor and gives to the rich, right? So it's kind of like this very interesting sort of like mythic reversal or mythic end to one story and recasting of a character, much like they do in some of these remakes of movies or some of these comic book characters or whatever, right? Where they sort of rewrite the character at this point and imbue it with qualities that are not only not what they were known for, but almost the opposing quality, right?
Right.
Hey, I have to go to the bathroom, so let's pause for a second. You can sort of dig out what you're looking at there. I'm going to be right back. I'm going to pause. All right. Sorry about that, guys. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave.
All right. So I'm going to go one. So you're so friggin' spot on with that Robin Hood thing, but that is like, that's a continuous demoralization. Mm-hmm. So what's long been often like part of like the woke community, part of the wokingness process is like going through your Dave Chappelle piece, right? And like when you go and you find out about Dave Chappelle and he stands up to the man, and then he goes and he runs away in Africa, and then he goes on Oprah and like, he tells and he's like, they wanted me to wear a dress. I'm like, I'm not going to wear a dress. That's too hacky. He's like, oh, all the greats have done it. Exactly. Why do I got to do it? And then you go and you find out that, oh yeah, Dave Chappelle did wear a dress.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that.
Yeah, he did it in a movie called Robin Hood, Prince in Tights.
And that was before he had the meltdown or after?
That was in the beginning of his friggin' career. So let me go and show you. Like, this is like,
well, and
I think it was Robin Hood, Men in Tights.
Well, and there's always been this sort of idea, both in Hollywood, obviously, but also amongst the Skull and Bones or the secret society type, that part of your initiation or your indoctrination is dressing in drag or wearing tights or wearing a dress. And so now we literally, like, all these people who are controlling this every man's investment, like whatever thing, are all men in tights, right?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, realistically, it's not just wearing a dress. The initiation, from what I gather, is much more.
Yes.
But regardless, like to your point about the symbol of Robin Hood, because Dave Chappelle like represented something, like Dave Chappelle, and then you go and you're like, hold on, like in Robin Hood, we find out that he was fraudulent, at least in that part. Like, I like to watch, at least, he makes me laugh. I find it humorous. I get entertained, but just that entire thing, like I found that to be like part of like what you're saying is this demoralization when someone comes to realize that, and they're like,
Yeah.
So one last thing I'd like to show before we cut for the public stuff into the private stuff.
No, this one is all private. So
this is all private? Oh, okay. Well, I still was I didn't realize then that was my break too, and I didn't take it.
Oh no, we'll take a regular break. I just couldn't hold it anymore. I didn't want to cut your thing. We can still take a break.
All right. I was gonna take a break, get a glass of water, maybe an apple.
Perfect.
All right. So I kind of like, I'm not good with like magic tricks, but I like them. Like I've always wanted to be good with sleight of hand. There's certain things I do with my hands, which are really good, but like I can't do like a lot of the coin tricks.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to do a trick with you. And it was originally shown to me with 2 wine corks.
Okay.
I'm going to do it with 2 stones. So I'm going to do it with this stone right here. This is a piece of serpentine, which was found just like a little bit from a little far, like in the earth from where I live. And then this here's another stone, which came from South Dakota. It came from yours neck of the woods. All right. So you see how I have it in? I got them in both of my thumbs.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to grab that one with this finger and this one with this finger. So I'm grabbing it. You see?
Yeah. You have to talk so that we see. Okay.
Oh, I got to keep talking. So what happens is it's in the crux of my fingers and I'm grabbing it with the actual hands. And it should be, I should not be able to pull these across. This is just totally an optical illusion. It's not an optical illusion. You can't see what I'm actually doing. But when you go and you try it, you're going to try to pull these apart and you're going to be like, how does he do it? Because I can't do it myself. So that is my challenge. If anyone can figure that out, I've only known 2 people who've ever been able to figure it out. And they both like made me nuts because they figured it out. And they figured it out in seconds. It took me like years. And then I finally had to call up the person. I'm like, just please tell me how you do it. And then they told me. So that was a little bit of entertainment I wanted to add before we take our break and I get a glass of water.
All right, I will just add to, I've never been particularly good. Same thing. Like, I'm not like one of these people obsessed with magic, but I appreciate a good sort of sleight of hand or illusion.
Hell yeah.
Or whatever, right? And, but I really like optical illusion, and like all of my favorite dancers, both like, so they engage, some of them engage in optical illusion, right? But others are actually able to do really interesting things with their bodies that I can't do with mine. Right. And so one of the things I learned to do is to create optical illusions to make it look like I was doing the thing they were doing, even though I wasn't. Right. And you can sort of do that based on like drawing attention to a certain part of your body, moving it away from the other, and then kind of move it around, or the pace at which you do some sort of move makes it look like it's something else or what.
So I want to see a video. I want you to go and tell, like, you just telling me that without the visual of what you mean, because I'm completely hooked. I want to know what you're talking about.
It does. Some of those things that I do when I'm dancing, right? It's like weird. Like I'll create little spin, like things that look like something's moving, even though it's not, right? Kind of thing. So, all right, we're going to take a quick break.
So I do that. Like I've got this ball, which I'm always playing with. And what I've gotten really good at is making it look like I'm throwing it at someone. And I've noticed this a lot about really good dancers, particularly poppers, like you're saying, like how they're able to like move at a like very, very slow, while other parts of their body move at a different speed. And that's like that optical illusion. I could do that with the throwing, and and the eyes, the expressions. That's part of it as well.
Yep, totally. Absolutely.
All right, we'll take our 5-minute break. I'll be back in a sec.
We'll be right back. Okay, guys, sorry, we just took a little break. We're back. All right, so I think there's a couple of interesting places we could go from here, but I wanted to show you just before we move on. Let me switch off that. I don't want to show that. All right, before we move on here, so what we were talking about with the Doge thing, right? So Doge, the code for it is DOGE. And this smart chemical company, right, their code is why isn't it doing anything? Their code is DGE, but this is their symbol, right? So we have DOGE, right? Smart Specialty Chemicals.
All right, let me see. What's the link to that? What's the company DGE? Where are they out of? Because they're a couple.
Let's see. Laura just sent me a link to the
Smart Chemicals. Let's see what comes up. DGE Smart DGE Europe. About us. Lubricants. All right. Who owns them? They've got all these different things, but okay, yeah. So going with what you were saying about, just like you wanted to share that.
I thought that was interesting, and my mind started going, well, it'd be interesting. Like, remember we talked about how like BLM used to mean Bureau of Land Management, and then it
right.
Black Lives Matter, and the sort of feeling and visuals that generates in a person's mind. And I started also thinking about how, like, we have this thing where we call like the celebrities and political figures now like AOC, right? AOC, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they refer to her as AOC. People say it over and over all day long. And I was sitting on the bathroom, I was like, AOC, addicted to OxyContin. People have to be fucking brain dead to believe the kind of crap she said, or whatever, right? I don't know if that's what AOC really stands for.
You're breaking up on me. You're going to have to repeat all that.
Oh, all right. Okay. So, no, I was thinking about.
All glitchy right now. Let's see what happens.
Can you hear me?
Frozen.
All right, hold on. Yeah, it says something funny with your.
Frozen.
Can you hear me now?
I might need to sign off and come back.
All right, sign off and come back. Sign off and come back.
Oh, you unfroze.
Okay, we're good.
Now it's saying my connection is unstable. It might be mine. Kinda.
Okay now. No.
All right. What were you saying about people have to be brain dead about AOC? I didn't see what connection.
I was just thinking about AOC in the back, like when we went to the bathroom, I went to the bathroom and it was like AOC, for some reason the term addicted to OxyContin came into my head, right? And it's like we obviously have had some of that epidemic. I'm not saying that means anything, right? But all of these letters that we're starting to refer to everything by elicit certain ideas in people's mind, whether they're related to the person or the thing that it's the code for or not, right? And I started to think about, Laura here has just looked up what AOC means chemically. What do you got?
Just that there's a AOC resins company.
Okay, so there's a
Chemical resistance, elevated heat resistance.
Chemical elevated heat resistance is AOC.
High reactivity, right? Hot press molding.
It's just interesting. What's funny is their website looks like a website from a political campaign. Like, look at the colors.
Yeah.
That's fucking weird, right? Like, it'd be interesting to know how much that company has, like, their stock has risen during the period, or their value, or how popular they've become during the time that we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right? Okay, but this whole thing with the letters and the names of things and multiple meanings made me think of like a story that I've kind of told a little bit before, but like I'd be interested to hear sort of your take on it. So we could go down that route, or we could get into some of the things you and I were talking about in terms of like devices, clocks, and timing and tenet and whatever. Where are you sort of interested in taking the rest of this chat? Or are you onto something right there? Or are you frozen? You're frozen. Okay, I'm going to push pause and wait for Michael to come back. You're back. There you are. You look more normal now. Okay.
I wasn't looking normal.
You were frozen. I was like, wow, did what I say really like stun you or something? All right, cool. All right, what was the last thing you heard?
The last thing I heard, you were talking about about AOC and the company and any change during her rise,
right?
Her political.
Yeah, I just think that would be interesting to see if those things, rise and fall together, or if one sort of generated the other.
Yeah, the correlation.
The correlation. Yeah. So I thought, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you a question on something else. So if you're going to keep going down that line, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No. If you're going to ask me a question on something else, go ahead.
So I was thinking about this during the break. I was thinking about like tennis. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about, I can picture Wimbledon in my mind. Mm-hmm. And when you see the, at least how it used to be, it's been a long time since I've seen Wimbledon. You can see where they keep track of the score, like on that board. Mm-hmm. And it has, there's a logo in the middle for Rolex and there's a time, mm-hmm. right?
Yep.
And so there are generally two types of sports, or at least I'll break down sports into two different ways. Those that play with the clock and those that don't play with the clock.
Right.
Okay. So the ones that play,
exactly where I wanted to go at some point today. Very good. Okay.
So those that play with the clock, they're usually like, that's how long the game lasts. That's like football or soccer or hockey or basketball. And then you have other games which the clock doesn't matter. Like golf is done when you're done 18 holes. Tennis is done when someone wins 3 sets, or so the question which I have and where I'm going with this is like, well, there are 2 parts. Part number 1 is like, why is there a clock in Wimbledon? Like there's not a clock on the golf scoreboard. Like I understand the significance of knowing how long a match is, I suppose, or knowing what time it is, but it doesn't, like, there's not like a necessity, I suppose. So there's that. And then putting that in context with GameStop,
Right.
like as a name, like GameStop, like, I'm not like someone who plays video games. Like I know they exist. Like I played Atari when I was young. So like I get it, I suppose, in a little bit. But like this, it would make more sense. It would be called Game Go.
Right.
Right. It's like, you don't want at least in the subliminal way of like, naming a company is like, you don't want to put an end to the thing you're trying to encourage. So I'm like, that's an interesting name nonetheless. I mean, I'm certain there's probably an explanation as to like why it's called GameStop, or like there's something very clever, because like gaming always has cleverness. But that, and then in light of like, about the game and the Glass Bead game and this all a game and all of these sort of things. So I'm curious, like I don't have any sort of connective storyline other than the fact that I see those as interesting points along the lines of everything which we've been talking about.
Okay, so it's interesting that you like went to sort of the spot that I thought maybe we'd kind of get to today, but I wasn't sure. You entered to it in a different way. So, okay, so yes, people, when they generally think of tennis, they usually think of Wimbledon first, because that's kind of like the most traditional, that's the tournament that's around that is still sort of represents the traditional way tennis was played and all of the historical aspects of the game and whatnot. Something really interesting that we can bring in this conversation is there was only, even though things got all screwed up based on coronavirus last year, there's only one Grand Slam that didn't end up getting played last year. Do you know which one that was?
Would that be Wimbledon?
That would be Wimbledon, right? So Australian Open happened at the beginning of the year at its normal time, really right before all, we were already starting to hear about it based in China during that period of time, but that got played while there was the sort of background of all those like fires and stuff going on out in the bush in Australia. That was like the big topics that were like surrounding the tournament, was the impending coronavirus doom and all these fires in indigenous areas and whatnot, right? And then the French Open was canceled, but just delayed, and it was played in the fall, which that has never happened before, as far as I know. The U.S. Open happened on its normal time, right? But Wimbledon canceled, and also you and I were having a conversation yesterday. We talked about the scoreboard with the clock on it and Rolex. Roger Federer being a spokesperson for Rolex, he has not played tennis at all since the coronavirus thing sort of happened. Right now, he is your quintessential Wimbledon player. He's won Wimbledon more times than any other active player, and that's sort of thought of as like the best place for him to display his particular skill set, right? And he's of course from Switzerland. Switzerland controls time, right? And Wimbledon would be where he's sort of the connector between Switzerland and England in that sense. As for the clock on the tennis court, you're right. There are some games that are totally ruled by time, and then others where maybe it's like a secondary factor, right? Like like gymnastics, you don't think of it, but actually the routines on beam and floor have to be like at least this long, or it can't be longer than such, right? Like between 1:10 and 1:30. So while it's not a race, there's still like you have to meet those limits. So it's a secondary factor. And then there's something like tennis where it's like all about points and there's no time end to the game necessarily, but the clock is there for a couple of reasons. It keeps track of the length of each game, the length of each set, and then the length of the match, right? So it's more just for record keeping. But time has been introduced into the game in another way recently that is controversial. And that is that they've imposed a clock on the time a player takes between points. So the person who's serving, from the time that the last point ends till the time they serve, is supposed to not be any more than 30 seconds, right? And it's controversial because Rafael Nadal, who's one of the top tennis players, he likes to take a really long time, right? Like he takes forever. He has like all these little rituals and things he does in between each point, and he has a hard time fitting it all in. So he doesn't like the time clock. And then there's other players who, like it because they're tired of waiting for Rafa, essentially, or others, like there's some people who play really fast, like Nick Kyrgios, who's a player from Australia. He plays incredibly fast. Andy Roddick used to play very fast. They take almost no time between points, right? And so this clock thing has come about in recent years, and I'm not sure if every tournament is using it yet, but a lot of tournaments are, and there's always, you see Rafael Nadal that's arguing with the ref and the ump about this sometimes and whatnot, and then the controversy over whether when people take longer than they're supposed to, like sometimes they get dinged and sometimes they just get a warning, and how is that decision made and all of that kind of stuff. So it's almost like time is trying to insert itself into the game in a way that wasn't there traditionally. And I think that's kind of interesting. And the insertion of time benefits some people and hampers others, just like the same, like what we've watched in terms of like the intrusion into the stock market thing, right? It benefits some, it hampers others. It seems like it's set up so some benefit and others don't. But yeah, I find it interesting that a sport in which so many people are sponsored by a timekeeping device, right, isn't based on time. But actually, I think if you talk to people who understand time in all its dimensions, they say it would, because like one of the key elements of the game is being able to take time away from your opponent. So being like a time bandit or a time dilator or a time thief or like a time transcender or whatnot, right? So I think in its more esoteric interpretation, time has always been a very significant part of the sport, but it isn't clocked in the same way that like a quarter in basketball is, or whatever kind of thing. I don't think baseball is not timed either, is it at all?
No, that's why it's called a pastime.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there you go.
That's what it's called. Like when you get past time, when you're past time, you're eternal.
Yeah.
Like time is a limitation. When you are participating in an activity, particularly the activities, like I would say very much like the head-to-head activities, like when I say activities, I'm meaning sports, are like thought of as like the playing of the great game of like one force versus another. Baseball, tennis would definitely be that. Like, those that are not timed, like that is a significant big deal in terms of, I would also say for like who it is meant for. What's interesting though is baseball is, like tennis is typically thought of like, it's more of it appeals to an affluent customer, whereas baseball is more of like the everyday man sport. But baseball is probably the most esoteric of them all, which I find interesting. But yes, like the time is the sports without time are eternal in a way.
I'm curious. I'm just wondering if the deletion of Wimbledon last year and the deletion of Roger Federer were an effect, like were somehow, like this is a, think about how strange time has been since we have another code, COVID-19, right? Which is a collection of letters and numbers in the same, we talked about things, right? That it seems to, it's an unusual sort of time period, and these two things that were very based on a very historical understanding of time and how it's used, deployed, whatever, right? Like have been absent from this game that has been played over the course of the year in different ways, but certain elements that are what you think of when people think of tennis, they think of Wimbledon and they think of Roger Federer, and they weren't part of the game last year.
Yeah, it's interesting. Was Wimbledon canceled during World War II? I assume it was.
Oh, I don't know.
I would think it would be.
Laura will look it up. I don't know enough.
Laura will look it up. My guess would be yes. I'm pretty, because the Olympics were. That would be my guess with that. So going on with that, go down with like GameStop and what your thoughts are like with like what that means and like stop and time and games and those sort of things.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think obviously there's the like very simplistic perception of it. Oh, it's like a stop, like where you stop here to get your games, right? So there's a place called Juice Stop too, right? Where you can stop and get your juice so it's almost like a post or like a depot.
Yeah. Okay.
But you and I both know that things are selected for their double, triple, and on entendres, right? And so,
right.
Yeah, like I feel like it may have been entirely, we don't understand exactly how time works, which direction it's really flowing in, and if it is linear for all players or just for the ones who believe in its linearity, right? And, maybe it was literally set there as a stop, right? Like, kind of thing, like this was always going to be where there was a stop in one system and a transition into something else, or something like it was like a marker, right? And so it was kind of there. It's part of the old, well, we put it there and we told you, right? Kind of thing that, that this was going to be what it was, but people are mostly unable to perceive that understanding of it. But I mean, I think, GameStop came about at a point where like we obviously were past the traditional ways of playing home video games like Atari and ColecoVision, right? But we weren't quite at total like VR online role-playing games or whatever, right? Like there was still like at least, a cartridge or a disc, right? Or something like that you put into a machine and you played on your own TV. And at some point there became internet activity with it and whatnot. But like, this was kind of the transition point, like the stopover between and maybe this is what digital actually was maybe digital, which because some of those games and discs are digital in nature, but it was like the stopover point between analog reality and complete quantum, like I don't even know what the next term would be after digital, right? But complete sort of quantum something or other based game playing and interconnectivity, or some kind of telepathy, right? Like maybe, like, I don't know. I don't know that I have the right language for this, but,
right.
But that was, and it kind of like, it also felt like in some ways, whenever I think of it, I think of also Blockbuster Video, right?
Huh.
Like
I'll tell you this, which is funny, is the moment you said, I'm reading the GameStop Wikipedia page right now, and my eye went exactly to where it's referring to it as Blockbuster, or comparing it to Blockbuster Video since you said that.
Yeah, like I think of like that thing, and the GameStop is very like simply coded with the red and black, right? And Blockbuster was blue and yellow, right? And these are sort of simplistic colors, simplistic sort of names, and they served a purpose that was only for a temporary period of time. Right.
Yeah, I'm reading this background right now, and you're absolutely right. And Blockbuster has always like been a little bit of a mental splinter for me, because the guy who founded Blockbuster became a billionaire for like this industry, which was only in existence for this really small point of time. And like, they really weren't doing it. Like, it just didn't make sense. And now all the Blockbusters, I don't know where you are, but every Blockbuster on the East Coast has become one of these like urgent care facilities. Like 6 years ago, there was no such thing as these urgent care facilities. You'd go to a doctor, you go to a hospital, but like all of a sudden, like, and it's same thing with Blockbuster. And it's just like what you're talking about with this GameStop, like these companies, which are I would assume are known. They're known to be like to have a limited shelf life. And like, let's say from an investing, and particularly a Wall Street investing, not like, your typical, like, I'm going to go and prepare for saving my 401k so I can retire, but that's gone now. But anyway, but how can I get the most amount of money returned? Like, there are all of these like certain like industries and companies, and they take these companies public, and they're not going to be long-term. There's no way they can be long-term successful, because the nature of their company is a fad. Yeah. And GameStop certainly is that. I'm reading its history. It began in 1984 as Babbage's.
What's Babbage's?
So that's what they called it. It was named after the guy who invented the computer, or at least like, or who came up with the theories, which then eventually became the computer. Charles Babbage, who was like alive in the 1800s, but it was started by these two guys who are Harvard Business School classmates, and then they opened their first store in Dallas, and the guy who helped get them up and running was Ross Perot.
Oh, that's interesting.
All right, and then the company became called NeoStar.
Interesting.
Like in 1994, like right before 1994 to 96, it was called NeoStar. And then it changed to like Babbage's again, and then was acquired by Barnes and Noble. And then I think it was spun off, and then it became GameStop by itself. And then they would like acquire all of these other like smaller, like not real, like AT&T wireless resellers. Like that's just like, it's a limited model. It only makes sense for a short amount of time. So it's all these limited plays. Like all of this is like limited. How can I like, the reason why they go public is how can I maximize the most amount of money and like create transactions? Remember, at the end of the day, Wall Street makes all its money just through transactions. It doesn't matter if you're buying or selling. I'm going to get 0.%, for whatever transaction. So there's a little bit of that. And that in itself, here's the irony, that in itself is the game. Like the joke to the regular person is like, oh yeah, you're investing for your long term, but no, the whole thing is a game based upon action, and I get paid upon movement. Like, I mean, that's this is the most interesting thing, and we're going to take this back to like maybe the Glass Bead game in a moment. Do you know when I say options? Do you know what I mean by an option?
Like I don't understand anything about the stock market.
So this is what an option is, like betting on the stock market. Okay. The stock market is actually like, I'm going to buy into a company and be like, okay, I'm going to put my money into Coca-Cola. And then an option is like saying, I bet that Coca-Cola is going to go up. I bet Coca-Cola is going to go down. So it's not a thing. It's a bet.
Okay.
All right. I mean, technically, it's like a right to purchase the shares at a certain amount in the future, but no one ever does that. It's just about the betting. Your betting does go up, does it betting going down? The options market is something like, I don't know, 10 times bigger than the stock market.
Yeah.
So like all of it, like that in itself is so significant because like it doesn't, the only thing that matters is the action. It's the same thing with football. Football was dead until it became until fantasy football came around.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, fantasy football like came in and like sucked in all of these people like in a new way because suddenly every game was meaningful and all this sort of stuff. And so like we're seeing this. Particularly in this time, we're seeing the real growth in games. And the reason why I'm talking about games is because we're looking at all of this from the Glass Bead game. It's all a game is now the secondary and tertiary game, which is at least taking all the public eye away from like the primary game. The primary game has gotten friggin' boring. No one wants to watch the main game. They want to go and do the secondary, tertiary, like the fast game.
Okay, so there's a lot of stuff that popped up. So I'm going to start right at the end here and work back. So the imaginary part, the imaginary iterations of the game are more powerful than the tangible part of the game, right? So the part where nothing is really, the betting on the thing is more active and more informative and important than the thing itself, right? And I think we can perceive this in like, with what you and I do, with a lot of the kinds of topics we cover and the way we generate ideas about alternate perceptions of things that people think of as tangible, right? Like people think of like, okay, there's two cities named Jonestown, right? And these are just two places that happen to have people names because they were founded by people with the same name. And there's an energetic connection between these two things. Like in your and I's reality, it's a portal or a door or a gateway or some sort of connective thread or tube that is different, right? Than just that these are two cities named after a same named person kind of thing, right? So the part that like you mentate about right, is more significant really than the thing that there is actual structure around. Right? Like, is what I'm kind of getting with what you're saying about the fantasy.
Say that again. Say that again.
The part of it that you sort of mentate about, right? People like to make up their own fantasy football teams. These are not real teams. They are only made up in the head of the person who was creating their team. Correct? Is that how fantasy football works?
More or less, yeah. I mean, it's more structured than that, but yes.
Okay.
And they're watching an actual game. Actually, they're watching probably multiple games, but the meaning of that game is completely So the meaning of that game is completely different for the person who's playing fantasy football than like your typical fan who's looking at it on baseline reality.
Yes. Right. So that's what this is like, so in some ways, fantasy football is an iteration of a glass bead game. Right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And just as the options are, and it's like, and both of these are the much bigger and the much richer and the much more engaging than the baseline reality.
And it can involve more people because not everybody has the physical ability to play football well. But I guarantee you there's like dorky, tiny, little skinny guys holed up in their dorm room that are the best fantasy football players ever because they're able to apply mathematics, geometry, creativity, art, the idea of like the resonance between people who might work well together on a team, all this kind of stuff. They're looking at it from all these different angles, right? So these are, think about this, like, we talk about how they've done a lot of things with some of the stuff to debase culture and waste time. Well, it depends on how you're playing. You could also say that they've offered us millions and millions and millions of different ways to hone our glass bead playing game. If you understand that that's what you're doing, right? If you really are like, whatever this is, like, I'm gonna string these beads and play these strings in a way that this is my music, and for the time I'm engaged in it, I'm going all the way with it.
So get a load of this. Yes, with a capital yes of what you're saying. So GameStop, it began with like, I'm like, why are they calling it GameStop? You're like, well, stop is like your truck stop. You stop at the truck. You go and you go get your games. I'm like, I don't know, because I know how you know why they call it In-N-Out Burger, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a triple entendre. Like In-N-Out Burger there's more psychology in that name than anything else, like on the most biological way, like both like sexually and then like expulsion. Like that's what it's about.
But
it's
also,
like the same reason.
Have you ever been to an In-N-Out Burger?
Yes.
Okay, it's not just in and out, man. The fucking line is like an hour and a half long around the corner. If you get in there, it's gonna be a long time before you get out, right? Like this is not an accurate representation of what it is. It's more to what you're saying. Yes, but
well, I mean, we'll take a quick moment. So when you begin to look at that, like, do they have like on the East Coast, they got like all of these like warehouse stores, you know what I'm talking about, like Costco and all those sort of things. So you got BJ's, like every single person is thinking blowjob, but no one's thinking that.
Right.
You got the sports goods, it's called Dick's. Everything has a sexual connotation,
Totally.
and you're not supposed to think. You're like, no, it's not a sexual connotation. It's a fucking sexual connotation.
It's like ElsaGate, but for adults. So people who think
exactly, and the reason why it does that is it creates like there's a whole bunch of reasons. But anyway, so GameStop. So it's like GameStop is like, why is it stop? Why are they going to put that in there? And so that was kind of bugging me until you pointed all of that out.
Okay, I got more. So in my area,
let me just finish this though, and then I'll stop. So the GameStop, which it's referring to, is the stopping of playing the game at that base level.
Mm-hmm.
Like put down you're not playing a video game. Stop that. You're playing another game.
Yep. Yeah, it's saying exactly what's happening. Just to note and compare here, in my neighborhoods and areas around where I live, most of the old Blockbuster videos and game, like some of there seems to be correlation between where like GameStop and Blockbuster is and where Radio Shacks were or are kind of thing back in the day. But a lot of the places that used to be Blockbusters are now either dry cleaners or banks in some of these mini malls. Which is interesting. You get taken to the cleaner. I don't know. I've also always kind of had this sense or feeling that like maybe some of these places where you're just like renting and returning things, that really it's like a money laundering kind of operation. They're fronts for something else for sure. Maybe probably related to child and drug trafficking would be my best guess. You know, and then the other thing with, I don't know how you're spelling Babbage's, right? But what did we have right before this whole game, the previous controversy, right, was the surge, that whatever happened at the Capitol. The previous surge was the surge of people into the Capitol where Ashley Babbitt was shot.
Is that the name of the, it was Babbitt. I didn't know her name.
So how do you spell Babbage's?
Babbage.
That's what I thought. So she was Babbit. Babbage, I don't know, but that whole scenario was awfully weird. Like if you watched any of the videos of that scenario, and then I just read an article on RT yesterday that they're not going to pursue pressing charges on the supposed police officer who shot her, but they're also not going to release his name. You know, of course he had a mask on, and you know, there's all sorts of theories about who and what he was, but it's interesting what you were, it was like weird. That's the first thing that caught my mind. And then the other thing is like, there was something you were saying about how the companies that like Blockbuster and GameStop went in and out of so many people's hands back and forth. Sometimes they were just their own thing. Sometimes they were acquired. Made me think of either Hot Potato, right? Like the game Hot Potato, which I think is a lot of what goes on Wall Street and even in the cryptocurrency kind of markets. Like a lot of these things are just set up. People think they're businesses that offer goods and services, but maybe they're just instruments that are being placed somewhere so that some action in the future can be taken. And the people who are in on it always know what that's going to be, and everybody else thinks it's something else. And so then once that action happens, that's kind of complete. It served its purpose. Whatever happens to it from there on out doesn't matter. Or also the game Monopoly, right? Because you can have your house and then somebody can come along and buy it and end up with multiple houses and liens on their property and whatever. Like, you know, and this is, did you know that Monopoly rewrote their rules a few years ago?
No, what did they change it to?
So Laura and I recently got a Monopoly game because we decided that like Laura needed to play some more games, right? For a variety of reasons, Laura needed to play games. And we get the Monopoly, we get it all set up, and then I go to take a refresher at the rules, right? And I start reading the fucking rules, and I'm like, this is not the game that I played when I was little. I played this with my dad when I was 6 and my sister was 2, and it was not hard to understand. The shit, now I couldn't understand it. I'm like, this shit's been rewritten by someone from Goldman Sachs to mentally prepare people for not ever actually owning a home, right? For just having a lien. You can have a mortgage, but you can't have a certificate of ownership, and you know, kind of thing. For like things being taken away and unfair rules happening. Like if you're too successful, you'll get, just like if you lose, you get sent to jail. But if you win too many times, you get sent to jail. All of this, I'm sure some of these rules were there before, but I was looking at this, I'm like, this is fucking complicated. We still haven't played. We're like, fuck this shit. This is too confusing. And I feel like I'm being mind controlled by Jamie Dimon. You know what I mean? Like, and think about there. I'm sure there's little kids out there that fully understand this concept, right? Because just like we have kids now who are 2 and know how to work an iPad, right? Once you're like, when you are born and raised in an era where this kind of complexity or corruption or whatever is going on, it's baked into the cake. And there's part of us that still remember the days when like you theoretically actually could own something, maybe. Right? So anyway, those are all the things that sort of popped up for me when you were talking about the Blockbuster and GameStop, and I think your In-N-Out Burger thing is hilarious because I agree with you 100%. In-N-Out Burger is a mind control program. Like the burgers are not that good, right? Like I can think of at least 10 places within a mile of where our local In-N-Out Burger is where the burgers are as good or better and that don't have an hour wait, right?
Do you remember last year when the spicy Popeyes chicken sandwich?
Oh my God.
Like
Yeah.
it's that level of mind control. It's like you could have, so okay, so let me hit a couple things back. So Babbitt, the Babbitt you were talking about, it's funny that I know who you're talking about, I didn't know her name, but as we were talking about gaming, what was popping in my mind as I was speaking was the blackjack tables from the movie Rain Man.
Mm-hmm.
And so Rain Man is Charlie Babbitt. That's Barry Levinson film. So going to your store, going on your theory of stores and being aware. So this is my personal thing where I'm like, all right, there's something going on here. This whole industry is a bunch of fucking bullshit and they're like doing something. And this I definitely think is like human trafficking or like bodies or something. It's the mattress shops. How many fucking mattress shops can there be? How many friggin' mattress shops can there be? I've like done the math. Like I've looked at how many households there are. I've made assumptions about how many mattresses, and it just doesn't make sense. And no one's ever in a mattress store, and everyone hates going into them.
Well, and there's something very strange about mattresses. Do you know what that is?
What?
They all come with a tag on them that say it's illegal to remove this tag from the mattress. Remember this?
Why do they have that tag?
I don't know, but it's something I've always noticed, and I've always removed the tag in.
Is
Right?
there anything else that has like something which says something so stupid?
So our trusty researcher here will look that up. And while she does, I just wanted to circle back to Wimbledon was started in 1817, canceled during World War I between 1915 and 1918, canceled again during World War II between 1940 and 45, and then not again until coronavirus 19, which tells me that
So World War
III. Yeah.
World War III. This is your World War III. Abso-friggin-lutely. How do you know that? Because of Wimbledon.
Okay, and then Laura wrote this, which I couldn't read before, but I'm because I can't concentrate on you and also read. But she came up with an interesting fact about Wimbledon. The ball children are unpaid, of course. I know that. Players are obliged to wear white. Yes, I know. Oh, to wear watches
if they are.
Oh, this is interesting. Players are obliged to wear the watches they endorse during play and or when claiming trophy. Okay, so this is fucking fascinating. And I've always been curious about this. I didn't know this was something particular to
Let me
Wimbledon.
see Laura's handwriting. Put it up against the camera, please. All right.
Okay, so
You know something secret about me now?
Yes, I do.
so you and I were having a conversation about which tennis players wear watches and which ones don't the other day, right? So Serena Williams, Rafael Nadal, and Roger Federer are all sponsored by Rolex. Rafael Nadal generally plays with a watch on. Serena Williams, I've seen her play with it on sometimes and other times not. And Roger Federer never plays with a watch on. There's other people who are sponsored by other watch companies. They sometimes play, sometimes they put it on, sometimes they don't. But I've always wondered why, when somebody just won the fucking match and they're waiting for their off-court interview to go claim their trophy, they take the time to put their watch on. Now I understand that as like, okay, they have a contract with the watch people, so they might be making them, but it's a rule at Wimbledon. So the entire purpose of Wimbledon is the clock.
I want to know when tennis players began to be sponsored by watch manufacturers.
All right.
That'd be great.
The other thing at Wimbledon is that Wimbledon, the players are required to wear white. It's the only place that has a different uniform code than any of the other tournaments. The players have to wear white, and there's no play on the middle Sunday of the tournament. Right, so there's
Right.
no play the middle. There's play the final Sunday, but there's no play the middle Sunday. So there's this break in between. The play stops and whatnot, right? But there you go, GameStop, right? Okay, so warning applies. What does it say?
The warning applies to the people who make and sell the mattresses, the ones who are last to handle the product before it gets to the consumer.
Okay, so the warning, the mattress label warning applies to the people who make and sell mattresses, the last people to handle a mattress before it's sold. So I guess we are the consumer.
Technically, you could take it off.
Right, you can take it off, but you can't resell a mattress, I think is the point.
Without a tag.
Mm-hmm.
Without a
Back
tag.
in the 20th century, they were stuffing mattresses with.
Okay, so here, okay, all the drama about a silly little label. It's one of those things with an interesting backstory that begins in the early 20th century when mattress makers and sellers were engaging in some pretty shady business practices. So that is a historically what that industry has done. Now, I happen to know somebody who owns a mattress shop, right? And she owns an organic mattress shop. Right. She has like amazing stuff. Like you go in there, she's got a bed in there that I'm like, dude, if I get on that bed, I'm never getting off. Right. She sells mattresses. She sells actual beds, couches, like organic, sheets and bamboo sheets and stuff like that. It's super nice. But like, it is not, it's a challenging business to make profit at. Right now, she's in an area where there's lots of people with a lot of money. And she's figured out some other things to sell, like air purifiers and stuff like that and whatnot. But the idea that there's so many mattress stores, to your point, right? Like most people I know at this point, they buy their mattresses like online.
Yeah, you buy everything online right now.
It's cheaper, but especially this mattresses take up a lot of space. So to have a mattress shop is expensive because they take up a lot of space, and to model them so people can go and feel it and whatnot, all that kind of stuff. So something else is going on there. You're right.
So I'm reading about watch brands too. It seems like the oldest watchmaker was 1755. So they're that's about as long as people have been producing watches, at least from a company level.
I think I'm curious as to, I don't think Wimbledon is in that area called the City of London, right? Like
I don't believe so.
Financial district.
The City of London is like downtown, like
I don't think it's there. Yeah. But I want to return to this for a second about that there's this requirement about the watches. If they're sponsored by it, they're required to wear it. It doesn't say that if they're sponsored by, sorry about that, guys. I somehow ran out of disk space mid-recording and it just shut the recording off. I'm glad it just did that and told me about it than me not knowing and not getting the rest of it. So, okay, we were at Wimbledon, right? And this whole thing where like, okay, so Roger Federer is also sponsored by Barilla, which is a spaghetti company, spaghetti, pasta and pasta sauce company, right? He's not required to eat spaghetti on the court. Now, obviously, if you're sponsored by an apparel company, that one makes, I mean, you and I both know that there's an element of like slavery and whatever that goes along with that and branding and whatnot. But I'm sure it may or may not be required. I would assume it's required that people wear that all the time. But this idea that the tournament requires the players that are sponsored by timekeeping companies to wear that watch, what is going on with that?
Well, I mean, if we're gonna go to like the surface level, like not the deep level. I mean, I would imagine would be this. It's like Rolex is probably encouraging that because they have a huge amount of influence or sway within the Wimbledon. And they're saying, hey, because we're sponsoring it, and there's other watch manufacturers, I want to make certain that if someone's sponsored by Omega, they're going to come up here with their Omega watch, like just for that reason, like, you know, kind of like what is it, honor among thieves sort of thing. Yeah, that would be my guess. But then also it really like establishes like, you know, just sponsors, you know, you're a slave to the sponsor, so you're going to come on up and you know, they're the ones who's paying you. But what I thought was interesting, while we went on pause, was I went and I looked. It seems like Rolex got involved with Wimbledon in 1978. And from what I'm understanding, from what I read, I didn't read these words exactly, but it seems like that's when like the whole watch sponsorship kind of got in. There weren't players who were sponsored by watch manufacturers prior to that. So 2018 was a big deal in Wimbledon because that marked the 40th anniversary of the beginning. So just like kind of going back in time, like who won that? Bjorn Borg won that year. Martina Navratilova won that year. And was also interesting under the junior men's, Ivan Lendl won that year as well. Like no one else I recognized.
And then in 2018, if I recall correctly, Novak Djokovic won. Does it say who won in 2018?
I didn't see who won 2018. I could go check though.
I'm pretty sure it's Novak Djokovic. I have a harder time keeping track of the women because it's just less interesting to me at this point. It used to be much more interesting than it is now. Can you check on that one?
All right.
But I'm curious, this thing with the watches, like, you know, we always think of like, when we think of athletics, like players representing countries or teams, and to the extent they have sponsors, okay, Nike, blah, 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 right? But like, what if like each watch company is tracking a different timeline? Right.
That makes a lot of friggin' sense.
And
they're all friggin' all the big ones are all Swiss watch companies too, like CERN companies.
So right, yeah, right. You know what I mean? But each is keeping track of a slightly different iteration of the same timeline, and they come together and they battle each other. If even maybe within the same watch company, right? Like maybe Rolex they've got 5 prongs on their crown. Maybe they're in charge of 5 various timelines or lanes of time or something. And Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer represent different timelines. And when one of them beats the other one in the match, that timeline gains dominance.
Nadal in 2018 and Kerber beat Serena.
Okay, so we had in 2018, Novak Djokovic beat Nadal in the final, and Angelique Kerber, German, beat Serena Williams. So we had both people who wear Rolex watches, Serena Williams and Rafael Nadal, go down to players not sponsored by Rolex. And I would be interested to know if either one of them are sponsored by a time company. Laura's figuring that out.
So I think that's a really interesting idea of when you're a player and you're owned by a watch manufacturer, and then like from from a greater reality outside of the simulation, right? That has a meaning we don't quite grasp.
And you know what else it makes me think of?
What?
Christopher Nolan requiring all of the actors on his set to wear the Hamilton watch.
The watch does something. I mean, that's why I got my watch, is because I intrinsically knew that if I wore this particular watch, it was going to put me in touch with a certain thing, which I thought that watch was resonating with. And then tying in, so you don't really see. You see like in like apparel, you'll see like Michael Jordan would be sponsored by Nike, but Michael Jordan plays on a team sport, and you see that in other team sports. But you don't necessarily, maybe there's some exceptions, there are probably exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, you only see watch sponsorships in like these, like in tennis and golf. Maybe auto racing, but that's kind of similar too. And like there's some like this idea of like what it is energetically owned by or controlled by. I think that's really and then what it could possibly be hinting at, in the same way like fantasy football, in the same way that the options market point to like a much, much larger game outside of the actual game.
Okay, so Angelique Kerber is sponsored by Rolex. So there we had Battle of the Rolexes. But Novak Djokovic is sponsored by Seiko, which is a much different level in quality and tradition and type of watch and whatnot. What I'm wondering also...
Seiko? He's sponsored by Seiko? I could be sponsored by Seiko.
Right? Like it's weird, right? Like it's like Timex or Seiko, right? Kind of thing. But Novak Djokovic does not get the same kind of endorsement deals and love from the public that Nadal and Federer do, even though
he needs to take the shot. Give him some vaccines. He'll get the big endorsement. But he'll get the Britney Spears endorsement.
Here's the other interesting thing. Most of the tennis players play golf. In fact, there have been a number of top tennis players that are also highly ranked golf players. There was a player from the United States named Marty Fish, who he has played in professional golf tournaments. And just a few months ago, Rafael Nadal came in 6th in the Balearic Golf Championship. Right. So I think that's, like there's lots of crossover there in terms
definitely is crossover there.
So which also lends to this idea that what if this is about geometry of place and energy of location based on the person who is there, right? Like there's something else going on. And to this point, the way that my friend Jeff and I became friends was he had listened to me talk about tennis, and he sent me some article where there was a discussion of the fact that Satoshi Nakamoto, who's the guy that lore is that he was the creator of Bitcoin, right? That the only time he's ever been actually seen, spotted, ID'd out in public was at GameStop match with Federer on center court at Wimbledon, right? So, and think Bitcoin is completely based on time. Like cryptocurrencies are completely based on the time it takes to hash out the algorithms or whatever it is, right? So I have to see if I can find that paper that Jeff,
like what you're saying is also really interesting when you think about I'm imagining like multiple levels of reality, but like when a company is deciding whom they're going to sponsor, it has to meet whatever their criteria is, as like, this is a good representation of our values. Right.
Yep.
And then like, let's take that from just like being like dollars and cents corporations to be like, you know, like Rolex owns a certain timeline or a certain sort of like frequency of time or something like that.
There's private companies that own tollways now. Like your cities will have like the regular public freeway, and there'll be like a tollway owned by some company in Spain or something like that.
Right.
So also,
you know, the first turnpike. So a turnpike is that a private road where you pay money to ride on.
Yeah.
The first turnpike in the colonies goes from the Philadelphia Freemasonic Lodge to the Lancaster City Freemasonic Lodge. It was called King's Highway.
That's interesting. Okay, so what is that energetic line or current really about? Right.
Exactly. And that line continues and crosses over. So, and this might be a nice way to wrap this up. So that line, King's Highway, go and, you know, look at your history books for you folks who are following along. King's Highway then continues from Lancaster City and then crosses over the Susquehanna River, which is another, like, I don't know, like 20 miles, 15 miles, probably like 15 miles from west of Lancaster City. And it goes right by the only watch museum in the United States, the National Watch and Clock Museum in Columbia, Pennsylvania.
Which is how you got interested in the Hamilton watch also, right?
Kinda. It was the reason probably why it's that watch museum is here in Lancaster, because Hamilton Watch was founded in Lancaster, and it's named after James Hamilton, the Rosicrucian who laid out Lancaster City. Right. And interestingly enough, Hamilton Watch was the first manufacturer to make a digital watch. Like it's often thought of as Timex, or one of the Japanese watch manufacturers was actually Hamilton Watch. They were the first digital watch manufacturer, and the first to get into product placement, which is a little bit different than sponsorship, but all of like the Elvis Presley films, like Elvis always wore Hamilton Watch, and was the first company to get into like paying money to be in Hollywood films.
All right, very interesting. And the last thing I want to say in as far as this goes is when we hear the term cryptocurrency, like one iteration of it, oh, this is like encrypted currency, right? But we also know about crypto terrestrials. What is hidden in this currency? Not just like, you know, not just it's encrypted, right? But is there some, you know, hidden energy, being, consciousness, other, you know, like what is riding in on this currency? What is hidden inside of it, right? It could be good, it could be bad, it could be neutral. It's a variety of things. It's not a judgment. But I think as to what we're talking about here with lanes of time, like lanes of times and who travels them, you know what I mean? And who is associated with them, kind of like a, you know, like a Silk Road or an Underground Railroad or whatever. What is hiding in there, right? I think that's kind of interesting stuff to play around with in our heads. All right,
I agree with you.
All right, so I hope you guys all enjoyed this first episode of Playing the Glass Bead Game. We'll be doing this once a week. Well, 1 week a month we'll do a Project Kids episode, but other than that, there'll be Glass Bead Games, and people who are Project Kids members will get these. Also, they'll be available for purchase singly. So Michael and I are going to say bye right now, and we'll see you guys next week. And we'd love to hear your feedback on some of this and start to build on some of these ideas, because I'm sure we're just two people sort of tossing this around in our head, and our very astute assistant over here, Laura, who provided a lot of the research connections for today's show. And
Can we see Laura's face on camera, please?
You have to give me warnings, like look better.
You look beautiful.
I think she always.
We saw your handwriting. We saw your soul. So now we might as well see your face.
All right, guys.
I'm waiting for my reading, Michael, based on my handwriting.
All right, guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.